This is what an NFL playbook looks like. Hi, I'm Matt Gutierrez. I'm a former NFL QB, and I'm now the VP of Sports Products at Rad3. An NFL playbook is full of thousands of plays that look like this. It's a collection of X's, O's, and arrows that show each player's responsibility on a given play. Now imagine being a rookie, a veteran player with a new coach, or like me, a backup player getting few to no reps, having to download all this information in a short period of time and execute at a high level when called upon. The only way to navigate this learning curve is through repetitive practice and study. Now there's a finite number of physical reps available on the field, so mental reps are essential. Mental reps have always been valuable, but the drawback is they're usually practiced from a third-person perspective watching video or at a reduced speed in walkthroughs. Imagine if players had the opportunity to get these mental reps in a fully immersive environment at game speed. Our CEO, Andy Wan, is going to share with you how Rad3 is making this possible.
Our system DimeTime delivers a three-dimensional computer-generated football training environment in high resolution and at 90 frames per second on the HTC Vive. We turned off the sound system because it would distract with the presentation, but we can deliver any acoustic environment or experience that a player or coach would want. In addition, we use motion capture to add to the realism of DimeTime. Realism is important because it helps us create a sense of presence, and presence enables a player to quickly forget that they're in a training facility and have them believe that they're actually out on a football field practicing. Our system is true VR. It's not just video that you can just passively watch. You can interact with our system, and you can practice football in our system, and get the mental reps that you want without fatigue or risk of injury. We've made DimeTime very easy for players and coaches and teams to adopt. We can take an entire NFL playbook with 1,000 plays or more, like the one that Matthew just dropped, and convert all of those into virtual reality plays within a week. Our system ships with a West Coast offense already installed, and we can model out an opposing team's pressure fronts in a day. We also created a play creation system. Very simple, easy to use. We have a formation library, route concept library. You can create a play in a fraction of the time that a coach normally takes to create a play. And the best thing is, as soon as it's done, you've got a virtual reality play. With that said, demonstration, please. I would like to have Dan DiMaiolo, our lead application designer, and Matthew Gutierrez demonstrate DimeTime to you.
Matt's going to first select a play. It's going to be a one-back power run play called 6-jab. And then once he's selected the play, he'll be taken onto the field. I'll give him a minute to select.
Totally black.
Okay.
It's totally black in here.
Oh, hey, JD. One second, we're having some technical problems.
I can't see anything.
So what are we seeing here?
So this is actually our training simulator, and this is the main menu where he would select a play. It's a play queue. He'll select an offense and a defense, and then he'll be taken onto the field where he can actually walk around. So
Looking at it's black. Yeah. Okay.
So this is actually the perspective Matt has through the headset. I think there's a display problem right now, but he actually would see this on the field, and he can move around with that headset. This allows him to basically be in a quarterback's perspective and see everything that we had in that playbook. So he would be able to look at his receivers to his left and right. He'd be able to see the routes that are being run, and then he'd be able to make adjustments based on practice.
So he'd be able to see the other players all running their routes.
Yep.
He can look around and he can move around. It's basically like he's on the field.
So everything you're seeing right there is what he would see, and he could actually move around on the field. And then he would be able to look at the opposing defense. If it was a bad matchup, as in this case, he would audible into a pass, and then he could run that pass play. And then he would be able to choose that receiver, and based on how fast he chose that receiver, we would then record a number of metrics, including what was the intended target, how fast did he choose that intended target, and would it have been a completed pass. And because we're using a 3D environment, we can basically record all of those inputs and then pass it to a coach, and then the coach sits down with the player and sees whether or not they are actually learning the game plan. So I'm now going to turn it over to Scott, who will kind of conclude the presentation.
In addition to the HTC Vive version of DimeTime you just saw, we also have a personal mobile version for the Samsung Gear VR. It's completely untethered. Players can take that home. They can use it on the team bus. They can train with it during the off-season, etc. Both systems are ready for deployment now. We had the opportunity to work with a number of NFL coaches, teams, and players over the past season to implement their feedback to create the DimeTime system you see today. Our go-to-market is to first focus on NFL teams and elite college programs, and eventually later this year, share it with players at all levels. Listen, I was an NFL linebacker for 11 years. I had 5 different head coaches and 7 different defensive coordinators. I know what worked, and I know what didn't work. I know what got me ready to play, and I know what didn't. I'm confident that DimeTime can revolutionize the way that players train and perform in this game. Questions, I guess? I think we're out of time.
All right. Thank you guys very much for the presentation. Judges, I'm going to start this off with Dahani. Given your experience in the NFL, how badly do you wish you had this?
I definitely wish I had this because I was the type of guy that spent a lot of time studying, but I kind of found my own methodology in order to learn the playbook better and at a quicker rate because the playbook did just look just like that. But I had a question. Looking at the simulation, obviously, there's some anomalies that come into the game of football, right? And Scott, I'll probably ask you this question. How do you guys account for sort of the different idiosyncrasies that occur during the play? And can you update that in real time? Because in any play, if I'm running sort of like an A-gap blitz and all of a sudden I have a guard come out of nowhere and just knock me down, I have to be able to recover to make the play. So how do you do that? How do you incorporate that into DimeTime so that guys are used to, things not happening as they're supposed to?
Here's what I know from a football standpoint and X's and O's standpoint. I can tell the engineers where to put certain guys. X here, O there, and these guys build it, so I should probably let Dan handle that type of question from an engineering standpoint.
Yeah, so what we're building in is essentially those kinds of random probabilities. If a linebacker, reaches the quarterback even faster. The system as is right now is built more for X's and O's, here's how it's supposed to happen. So you can kind of, it's more of the mental focus of it, not necessarily the random probability of something happening, but that is something we're working to build.
So, at the forefront today in the NFL, and certainly for me as a physician, health and safety comes first.
Right.
So you didn't mention how you would get into that space. So let me just give you an example. Behavior modification. How could you use this system for a player to be able to simulate an impact so that they could change the way in which they go about taking on a defensive player? How would you get into that space?
So just to make sure I understand, what our system does is essentially we can track, say a quarterback's looking to the left,
Right.
And we know a blitz is coming, in his blind side. Then we can track that kind of metric and then report it back. So you can then, sit down with a player and kind of coach them through it and say, well, if you're going to stare to the left, you're going to get hit, and you need
Exactly.
to change that part of the game.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that if you could see beforehand that you were going to get hit in a certain way, you could potentially modify behavior.
That's exactly what we're doing. We're recording because it's a 3D environment. We know where a player's looking. We know where they're at in the field. We know, where the defenders are, and then we report that back to the coach, and that's where the coach then is supposed to, tell them they need to change how they're practicing.
Yeah, let me ask about competitors, because sitting here at Stanford, I know there are people who've worked on this kind of thing. So why are you different? Why is what you do, if I'm Dallas Cowboys, why should I choose your system, not another?
I'll take that one. You don't have to videotape anything. You don't have to go through the effort and hassles of shooting every play. And when a video play, and when video is shot from a quarterback's perspective, it's not helpful for the wide receiver. We're able to move the camera and perspectives wherever we want instantly. We can take any offensive play, match it up against any defensive play, and we don't need to hassle around with cameras to do those things. Also, right now, NFL games are not shot in 3D or in virtual reality. So the solutions that are currently out there that have gotten some press are of no use for either looking at your own plays or an upcoming opponent's place to break that down to create anything that might help with game preparation. The only thing that these other systems can be used for is to videotape their own practices, which has some value, but not as much value as people think. The other thing is these immersive videos have to be shot with multiple cameras, and then the camera feeds have to be glued together or stitched together to create sort of, the best way to describe it is you're in the center of a soccer ball looking out at all the different panes, which all represent one camera. And that takes time. That takes a day or two. So what you're doing with these other systems is looking at your own practices 1 day or 2 days after you practice, which has, I think, limited value.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from the players that you've prototyped this on? And what's the correlation between the virtual experience and actual physical improvement?
I think it's great from a player standpoint from a number of areas. One, you can simulate real-time practice reps and a whole playbook and run through that in a week. There's incredible value. And Doc, you mentioned the health and safety component to this. I mean, there's huge advantage there as well. You know, in the last round of CBA negotiations, and Mr. Kraft, you know, I see you in the audience, one of the areas where we did have some consensus is around reducing practice time, because just the wear and tear and the realities of that is just not realistic anymore. So, like Matt had said earlier, for him as a backup quarterback, he needs to get more reps. One thing that drives people crazy, coaches especially, with reduced reps, is that they can't get all the guys and the looks they need. So with something like this, you can simulate that, you can replicate that. So from a health and safety standpoint, it's getting all those people the extra looks they need, and this can kind of fill the void and those coaches' concerns.
So, you a quick question, Jim?
One quick question. I really like the simplicity of the go-to-market approach and the targeted approach, but when you start talking about the consumer, that means a lot of operational scaling. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg as a team scaled. How are you going to find a Sam Palmisano or an individual who can scale this when you start looking at the consumer?
Quick answer, please.
Well, I think we can scale it.
Okay.
I
That was-
think-
All right. Well, that was Dime Time. Thank you guys very much.
That's good.